Rescue the three women. You just saw him, Charles Ramsey. Remember that name. Here's his account in his own words.
I heard screaming. I meet my McDonald's. I come outside. I see this girl going nuts, trying to get out of her house. I go on the porch, and she says, "Help me get out. I've been in here a long time." So we kick the bottom, and she comes out with the little girl, and she says, "Call 911." My name was Amanda Berry. That girl Amanda told the police, "I ain't just the only ones. It's some more girls up in that house." They look like they have been fed in a long time, bro.
And you had no indication that there was anything going on?
Bro, not a clue that girl was in that house or anybody else was in there against their will. Because how he is he just comes out to his backyard, plays with the dogs, tinker with his cars and motorcycles. Yeah. Ain't nothing exciting about him. Well, until the day.
What was the reaction on the girls' faces? I can't imagine to see the sunlight, to be around people.
I knew something was wrong when a little pretty white girl ran into a black man's arms. Something is wrong here.
There is a sound that 911 dispatchers hear thousands of times a year. Scared voices, crying voices, confused voices. But on the afternoon of the 6th of May, 2013, a dispatcher in Cleveland, Ohio, picked up a call that was different from anything she had ever heard. The woman on the other end of the line wasn't crying. She wasn't whispering. She was speaking with the desperate, burning clarity of someone who had been waiting to say those exact words for an entire decade. "Help me. I'm Amanda Berry. I've been kidnapped and I've been missing for 10 years and I'm here. I'm free now." Read that again. 10 years. She had to remind the world who she was. She had to announce her own rescue, because the world had forgotten her name, or at least the world had stopped looking for the person attached to it. What you are about to hear is not a story about a cold case that was cracked open by a detective, or a breakthrough in forensic science, or a tip from a reformed informant. This is the story of a 16-year-old girl who survived a decade of unimaginable horror inside a house that sat 3 miles from where she disappeared, a house that neighbors walked past, that investigators drove past, that was even visited by police, and the only thing that finally opened that door was Amanda Berry herself. Quick question before we continue. Are you one of those people who listens to true crime while cooking, driving, cleaning, or are you fully locked in right now, lights dimmed, volume up? Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I want to know who's staying up way too late solving mysteries with me. If you're enjoying this deep dive, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. New real cases every week, and this one you need to hear all the way through. Because what this case ultimately became was about more than a rescue. It was about a mother who died searching. It was about a community that failed to see what was right in front of them. It was about a man who stood at vigils, mourning a girl he had locked in his basement. And it was about 3 women who refused, quietly and stubbornly, to stop being alive. Let's go back to the beginning. April in Cleveland is unpredictable. The winters are brutal enough to hollow people out, and by the time spring comes, the city feels like it's finally exhaling. April 21st, 2003 was a Monday. Ordinary in every way, overcast skies, the kind of forgettable afternoon that nobody photographs or marks in their calendar. In the Tremont neighborhood on the west side, kids were getting home from school, families were starting dinner, the city was just being a city. Amanda Marie Berry was 16 years old. She would turn 17 the very next day, April 22nd, and she had plans. She always had plans. Amanda was the kind of girl who was going somewhere. Even if going somewhere right then meant saving up money from a part-time job at the Burger King on Lorraine Avenue and West 110th Street, a few blocks from where she lived, with her mother. She was energetic and warm, the kind of teenager who was close enough to her mother that friends described the two of them as more like best friends than parent and child. Her mother, Luana Miller, called her Mandy. That detail matters, because people who knew Amanda well really knew her, called her Mandy. Strangers didn't know that name. On the evening of April 21st, Amanda clocked out of her shift at the Burger King, pulled out her phone, and called her sister Beth to let her know she was getting a ride home. That was the last call she ever made as a free person. What happened next wasn't fully understood for years. But what investigators eventually pieced together was this. A man approached Amanda as she was heading home. She recognized him. He was the father of one of her friends from middle school, a familiar face in a familiar neighborhood. His name was Ariel Castro. He was 52 years old, a school bus driver for the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. He had a warm reputation. Neighbors knew him as the guy who would host barbecues on his porch, play salsa music, talk about his Harley Davidson. He was the kind of man who filled the sidewalk with normalcy. He offered her a ride. Then he said something that tilted her towards saying yes. He told her that his daughter, her friend, was at his house. He told her she could come say hello. He's like, well, she's at my house. Would you like to go see her? Amanda later recalled. She got in the car. The house was at 2207 Seymour Avenue, a white two-story home in a working-class stretch of the Tremont neighborhood. Once inside, Castro told her his daughter was maybe taking a bath. They would just wait. So he said, we'll just wait. Amanda remembered, so he started showing me around the house. She never got back out. What Amanda didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that she wasn't the first. Castro had already done this once before. 7 months earlier, in August 2002, he had lured a 21-year-old woman named Michelle Knight into the same house under the same premise. Michelle had been trying to navigate a custody battle for her young son. She was going through one of the hardest periods of her life, and Castro had offered her a puppy for her son. That was all it took. He restrained her with extension cords the moment the door closed behind her. When Castro showed Amanda through the house that April evening, he walked her upstairs, and in a bedroom, bathed in the pale glow of a television, she saw a woman she didn't recognize asleep. She assumed it was just someone who lived there. She didn't ask questions. That woman was Michelle Knight. She had been there for 7 months. The chains came for Amanda shortly after. She was locked in a dark, filthy room approximately the size of a closet. She screamed. She cried. She called out for someone, anyone, to help her. I just started screaming and crying. She later said, somebody please help me. And nobody came. Nobody came. I was so scared that I was going to die. I didn't think I was ever going to make it home. A few days later, on the 4th day of her captivity, Castro moved her to an upstairs bedroom and chained her to a radiator. She had a tiny black and white television. And on that television, she watched her mother and her sister appear in news broadcasts begging for someone to come forward. Luana Miller's face, raw with grief and fierce with love, appeared on the screen. And Amanda Berry, chained to a radiator in a house 3 miles from her home, made herself a promise. That kept me going, and I said, you know what? I'm going to make it home to you. As long as you fight, I'm going to fight. What happened back in the world outside that house was the familiar machinery of a missing persons investigation. Police opened the case as a missing juvenile. There were search efforts, flyers, candlelight vigils. Within the first week, the FBI took over certain aspects of the investigation. They were just beginning to develop technology that could track a cell phone's last known location, and they got a break. Or so they thought. About a week after Amanda disappeared, Luana Miller received a phone call. It came from Amanda's cell phone. There was a man's voice on the other end. He said, I have Amanda, she's fine, she'll be coming home in a couple of days. Her mother thought it was a prank at first. She had seen Amanda's photo on the television that day, and it felt like someone calling to be cruel. But investigators confirmed the call came from Amanda's actual phone. The FBI's stance changed. This was no runaway. Using that call, the FBI tracked Amanda's phone signal to a 30 to 40 block radius on Cleveland's west side. We spent about a week around the clock in that area, hoping that this phone would be used again. FBI agent Tim Kolonik later said it never was. Castro never used the phone again. That trail, the only real trail they had, went cold in an instant. As one investigator remembered it, that was the last we heard of anything. Months passed, then a year. Luana Miller refused to stop. She was, by all accounts, not the kind of woman anyone would describe as quietly suffering. She was fierce and relentless, chain-smoking, straight-talking woman who made phone calls to the police and the FBI so often that her name was known by the people who answered the phones. She organized vigils. She walked the route from the Burger King to her home over and over again, as if she could retrace her daughter's steps into an answer. She printed flyers. She called every journalist in Cleveland she could find, including a columnist at the Cleveland Plain Dealer named Regina Brett, whom she would sometimes call and yell at, asking why there was nothing new in the papers, why nobody was talking about Amanda, why the world seemed to have moved on. She would yell at me, and then she'd call me honey. Brett later recalled, she'd say, "Oh, I just want to find her, please write about her." There was something almost unbearably specific about what Luana Miller did in those years. Every Christmas, she bought presents for Amanda. She kept them. She didn't know when Amanda was coming home, but she was certain that she would be. The gifts piled up, each one a quiet act of defiance against a world that was slowly, quietly shifting its belief that Amanda Berry was still alive. The police too began to see the case differently as more months passed without a break. Teenagers go missing for all kinds of reasons. Some run away, some fall into dangerous situations of their own making. The absence of new evidence, of new tips, of any lead at all, created a gravitational pull toward the most comfortable conclusion that Amanda had likely left on her own terms. Luana Miller never accepted that, not for a single day. In January 2004, 9 months into Amanda's captivity, child welfare officials alerted Cleveland police that a school bus driver had left a child unattended on his bus. Officers were sent to the driver's home to investigate. The address was 2207 Seymour Avenue. Nobody answered the door. The officers spoke to the bus driver at a later point, determined there was no criminal intent in the bus incident, and closed that portion of their inquiry. The bus driver's name was Ariel Castro. Amanda Berry was inside that house when police knocked on the door. 19 days before the 1-year anniversary of Amanda's disappearance, a second girl went missing. April 2nd, 2004. 14-year-old Gina DeJesus, whose full name was Georgina Lynn DeJesus, was on her way home from middle school at West 105th Street. She stopped at a payphone with a friend to ask the friend's mother if they could have a sleepover. The answer was no. The two girls parted ways. Gina never made it home. The connection to Amanda Berry's case wasn't immediately obvious. Gina had disappeared from almost exactly the same stretch of Lorraine Avenue where Amanda had last been seen, a fact that would later be highlighted on national television. But in the early days of the investigation, they were treated as two separate cases. What investigators didn't know was that Gina DeJesus and Ariel Castro's daughter Arlene were close friends. On that April afternoon, Castro had driven past Gina, recognized her, and asked if she wanted a ride. She got in. He drove her to Seymour Avenue, told her he wanted help carrying a speaker to his car, and walked her down to the basement. He told her the door was an exit. It wasn't. Now, there were 3 women in the house on Seymour Avenue. Back in the outside world, the two cases began to draw national attention. In April 2005, the television show America's Most Wanted ran a segment on both Berry and DeJesus, highlighting that they had vanished from almost the same location. One of the people interviewed for that segment was Arlene Castro, Ariel Castro's daughter, Gina's best friend. She spoke about Gina's disappearance on national television. Her father, the man who had abducted Gina and was keeping her chained in his basement, watched that broadcast. There is documented evidence that Ariel Castro attended vigils held for Gina DeJesus. He stood in the crowd, he listened to the prayers, he expressed sympathy to the family. This is the detail that the mind resists accepting. But it happened. The year 2004 brought devastation of a different kind for Amanda's family. Luana Miller appeared on the Montel Williams show in November of that year. Seated in the television studio in front of a live audience, she came face to face with a self-proclaimed psychic named Sylvia Brown. She asked the question she had been carrying for over a year: "Is my daughter alive?" Sylvia Brown looked at her and told her that Amanda was dead, that she was in water. The broadcast went out across the country. And somewhere in a locked room in Cleveland, Ohio, Amanda Berry, who was still very much alive, had no way to tell her mother that the psychic was wrong. The impact of that moment on Luana Miller was visible and irreversible. A friend named Art McCoy said she was never the same after that. She began to take down Amanda's pictures. She gave away Amanda's computer. She tried against everything in her to absorb a grief she had been refusing to accept. I still don't want to believe it, she told a reporter afterward. I want to have hope, but what else is there? Her health began to decline not long after. Pancreatitis, complications, hospitalizations. People who knew her watched a vibrant, fierce woman fade under the weight of something no medical professional could treat. Luana Miller died on March 2nd, 2006. She was 43 years old. She literally died of a broken heart, Cleveland Councilwoman Donna Brady said. A friend, Art McCoy, described watching her decline this way. I watched Luana sink from a vibrant woman to a dying woman, grieving over not being able to find Amanda. And then he added, through tears, right now she's probably shouting in heaven. When Amanda Berry finally learned that her mother had died, she was still in that house. It broke something in her. In an interview years later, her voice dropped when she talked about it. I think that was the hardest part of being in there. She was always fighting. She was never going to give up on me. For her to get sick and I couldn't be there with her, I couldn't help her when she was sick. Luana Miller died without knowing what happened to her daughter. She died not knowing that Amanda was less than 4 miles away from where she took her last breath. She never got to see the reunion she had spent 3 years fighting for. That Christmas, December 25th, 2006, Amanda Berry gave birth to a daughter inside the house on Seymour Avenue. She was 20 years old. The father was Ariel Castro. Michelle Knight, despite everything that had been done to her, delivered the baby. Castro had told her that if the baby stopped breathing, he would kill her. At one terrifying moment during the birth, the infant did stop breathing. Michelle breathed into the baby's mouth until she began again. Amanda named her daughter Jocelyn. This is his kid. How do I feel about that? Amanda later reflected. She resembled him a lot, and I would look at her and I just felt, she's mine, she's mine. The arrival of a child in that house did something complicated to the dynamic between the captives and their captor. Jocelyn became, in some ways, a small light inside a dark place. The women created a makeshift school for her. They taught her how to look both ways before crossing a street, doing it with an imaginary road inside the house, walking her through the motions of a normal childhood, because normal was the only thing they could give her. We would pretend to leave our house, Amanda said. I would tell her, okay, we're at a street now, so you gotta stop. Then you look both ways for cars, and then we can go across the street. Jocelyn grew up seeing chains on her mother. Castro told her to call them bracelets. Children believe what they're told. She didn't know the word for what was being done to them. Years passed. Jocelyn grew. The world outside continued to move without the 3 women in it. The families of Berry, DeJesus, and Knight held their annual vigils. Investigators periodically followed leads that went nowhere. In September 2006, police dug up a garage floor in Cleveland based on a tip, nothing. In July 2012, a prison inmate led investigators to a vacant lot, claiming he knew where Amanda's body was buried. They excavated the lot and found nothing. He was later sentenced to 4.5 years for filing a false report. Each dead end made the case feel colder than the last. Some neighbors of 2207 Seymour Avenue did notice things over the years. In November 2011, a neighbor named Israel Lugo said he contacted police after his sister saw a woman with a baby banging on an upstairs window. According to Lugo, he never received a response. In 2012, a group of elderly neighbors reportedly called police after seeing women in Castro's backyard with what appeared to be chains and leashes around their necks. Police, according to multiple accounts, never responded. The Cleveland Police Department maintains that there is no record of these calls. Whether they were made and lost in the system, or whether memory has reconstructed them in the aftermath of what was eventually discovered, is something that cannot be fully resolved. What is factually documented is this. Police visited 2207 Seymour Avenue twice. Once when Castro himself called about a street fight, once to investigate the school bus incident. Neither visit produced a search of the premises. Meanwhile, the house itself was a visible anomaly on the block. Windows blacked out. Castro would always park behind the house and enter through the back. A neighbor of 1 year standing, Charles Ramsey, who worked as a dishwasher at a downtown restaurant, later said he had eaten ribs on Castro's porch, listened to salsa music with him, and in all of that time had never once seen anything that struck him as wrong. A barbecue with this dude, Ramsey said. We eat ribs and whatnot and listen to salsa music. Not a clue that girl was in that house. That is the nature of people who do what Ariel Castro did. They are not monsters who wear their evil visibly. They are neighbors, bus drivers, fathers of your friends. They know exactly how much normalcy to perform and when. Monday, May 6th, 2013, it was a warm afternoon and Ariel Castro left the house to get food at a nearby McDonald's. Before he left, he locked the exterior storm door, as he always did. What he forgot, or perhaps didn't bother with, having done this 1,000 times before, was to lock the heavy interior door. Amanda Berry noticed. She had lived in that house for 10 years, 2 weeks, and 15 days. She knew every creak in the floorboards. She knew the weight of every lock. She knew which doors held and which didn't. And she knew, in the way that captives develop a sixth sense for these things, that something was different about this afternoon. She tried the inner door. It opened. What she was looking at now was the storm door, the exterior door, the last barrier between her and the street, between her and the rest of her life. She began to pound on it. She began to scream. She told police later that she didn't immediately kick the door because she believed, at first, that Castro was testing her, that he was somewhere nearby, watching, waiting to see what she would do. She hesitated. She thought about what would happen if she was wrong. Then she kept screaming anyway. A Spanish-speaking neighbor named Angel Cordero heard the commotion from outside. He moved toward the door. But the language barrier between them was too wide. He couldn't understand what Amanda was saying and he eventually stepped back. He didn't leave the area, but he wasn't able to help her break through. Then Charles Ramsey heard her. He was in his home next door, eating a meal, when the sound of a woman screaming cut through the afternoon. He came outside. He saw a woman's arm pushed through a gap at the bottom of the storm door. He heard her voice. "Help me get out. I've been here a long time." Together, Amanda from inside, Ramsey and Cordero from outside, they kicked at the bottom panel of the storm door. They kicked it again. Then again, the door began to give. Amanda Berry crawled through the gap, pulling her 6-year-old daughter through behind her. She stood on Seymour Avenue in the May sunlight. She hadn't stood on a public street in 10 years. She was 27 years old. She had gone in as a girl in a Burger King uniform, and she came out a mother. She ran to a neighbor's house and picked up a phone. What she said into that phone became one of the most replayed audio recordings in the history of American true crime. The dispatcher answered. Amanda's voice was breathless, frantic, and entirely certain. "Help me. I'm Amanda Berry. I've been kidnapped, and I've been missing for 10 years, and I'm here. I'm free now." The dispatcher, perhaps not fully processing what she was hearing, asked Amanda to confirm the address. And Amanda, who by now had been in the neighborhood for a decade, told her exactly where she was. Then she said something that stopped the call in its tracks. "I'm Amanda Berry. I've been on the news for the last 10 years. Police officers Michael Tracy, Barbara Johnson, and Anthony Espada arrived at 2207 Seymour Avenue within minutes. They entered the house and found the interior in a state of deliberate containment, doors reinforced, windows covered. They moved through the rooms. In one upstairs room, they found Gina DeJesus. She had been missing for 9 years, 2 months, and 4 days. She was 23 years old. In another room, they found Michelle Knight. She had been missing for 10 years, 9 months, and 14 days. She was 32 years old. Both women were alive. The city of Cleveland, when it exhaled that evening, did so in a sound that nobody had heard before. Equal parts celebration, grief, and disbelief. People poured into the streets around Seymour Avenue. Balloons were tied to streetlights. Complete strangers embraced. On the other side of the city, at the hospital where Amanda and Gina were taken for evaluation, their families were on their way. On May 8th, 2013, Amanda Berry and Gina DeJesus were reunited with their families. Cameras captured the moment, crowds cheering, people crying, arms reaching. Amanda Berry's sister, Beth Serrano, stepped in front of a bank of microphones and managed to say, "We are so happy to have Amanda and Gina home." The man who had done all of this was arrested within hours of the escape. Ariel Castro had been out eating while his prisoners broke free. He was taken into custody on May 6th and charged initially with 4 counts of kidnapping and 3 counts of rape. His 2 brothers, Pedro and O'Neill, were briefly detained but cleared of any involvement. Castro had acted alone for over a decade, in plain sight. In the days that followed, the details that emerged from the investigation were staggering in their accumulation. The indictment eventually grew to 329 counts, 177 counts of kidnapping, 139 counts of rape, 2 counts of aggravated murder related to pregnancies that Castro had terminated by force. Michelle Knight alone was reportedly impregnated at least 5 times during her captivity. Each pregnancy ended by starvation and physical violence. The community that had lived around this house for a decade struggled visibly to process what had been happening in the building next door. Neighbors who had waved to Castro on his way out to get his motorcycle now found themselves reconstructing a decade of ordinary moments and looking for the thing they had missed. Most of them found nothing. And that was perhaps the hardest thing of all. That evil of this specific magnitude can be completely invisible when it wants to be. In court, Ariel Castro showed very little of what most people would recognize as remorse. He stood before a judge in July 2013 and entered a guilty plea to 937 criminal counts. The plea bargain was arranged to spare him from the death penalty. The sentence handed down on August 1st, 2013 was life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 1,000 years. Before the sentence was announced, the courtroom heard from Michelle Knight. She had not been in the same room as Castro since her escape. She stood up and looked at him directly and said, "I spent 11 years of hell. Now your hell is just beginning." She told him she was a fighter, that she would live on, that he would die a little every day. And then she said with a composure that silenced the room, "I will live on. You will die a little every day. As you think about the 11 years and the atrocities you performed on me and the others." Amanda Berry did not attend the sentencing. She sent a written statement through her attorney. Her sister Beth spoke on her behalf. Exactly 1 month after receiving that sentence, on September 3rd, 2013, Ariel Castro was found dead in his prison cell at the Correctional Reception Center in Orient, Ohio. He had used his bed sheets to hang himself. He had been alive long enough for the world to know what he did. He did not survive to face the full weight of his 1,000-year sentence. There is an additional detail in this story that carries a particular kind of sorrow, and it belongs entirely to Amanda Berry. The day after her rescue, when the immediate shock was beginning to give way to something more complicated, the realization of all the years that had passed, of everything that had happened in the world outside Amanda, went to a cemetery. She went to visit her mother. Luana Miller had been in the ground for 7 years. She had died searching for a daughter who was alive 3.5 miles away. She had been told by a psychic on national television that Amanda was dead. And she had spent her last months of life trying to decide whether to stop hoping. She had bought Amanda Christmas presents every single year until her health gave out entirely. She never knew. Amanda Berry stood at her mother's grave, and whatever passed between them in that moment belongs only to Amanda. But the image of it, a 27-year-old woman, free for the first time in a decade, standing over the grave of a mother who died waiting, is one that resists easy description. It is simply one of the saddest things in this entire story. The rescue was real, the miracle was real, and the grief inside the miracle was also real. I think that was the hardest part of being in there, Amanda said later. She was always fighting. She was never going to give up on me. Amanda's grandfather had made her a promise before she disappeared that when she turned 16, he would give her a classic Chevrolet Monte Carlo from the year she was born. He had kept the car during her decade of absence, waiting. When she came home, he gave it to her. It needed restoration after years of disuse. Automotive shops across Cleveland offered to do the work for free. Small moments of the world saying, "We kept things waiting for you. We're glad you're back." It's worth pausing here to ask the question that communities and investigators have wrestled with ever since May 6, 2013. Could any of this have been stopped sooner? Could the three women have been found years earlier? The honest answer is deeply uncomfortable. Police visited the house and did not search it. Welfare investigators came and went. Neighbors reported strange things, and their calls, by their own accounts, went unanswered. A man who was interviewed for America's Most Wanted about the disappearance of Gina DeJesus was the person who had taken her. His own daughter talked to national television about her missing best friend, never knowing her father had taken her. The FBI investigated and found no leads. For over a decade, the investigative machinery generated heat but no light. Part of the failure was systemic. Amanda Berry was 16 when she disappeared. Teenagers who vanish are frequently categorized early in investigations as potential runaways, even when the evidence doesn't support that conclusion. That initial assumption shaped how the case was approached and how urgently resources were deployed. Michelle Knight's case suffered even more severely from this bias. She was removed from the National Crime Information Center database entirely 15 months after she disappeared because police could not locate her family to confirm she was still missing. The FBI and the Cleveland Police Department have maintained that neither the inclusion nor exclusion of Knight's name in the database had a bearing on the eventual outcome. That may be true, but the broader pattern, it represents the way certain kinds of disappearances are treated with more urgency than others. Is a problem that the Cleveland case forced into the public conversation in a way that has not entirely resolved. In the aftermath, Cleveland launched a review of its missing persons protocols. The Department of Justice conducted an evaluation of the Cleveland Division of Police and found significant structural problems with how cases were handled, problems that extended far beyond this single case. The house at 2207 Seymour Avenue was demolished 3 months after the rescue in August 2013. Demolition crews cleared the site in a single day. The lot sat empty. People left flowers there for years. Now, more than a decade later, Amanda Berry and Gina DeJesus have transformed what happened to them into something that faces outward. Amanda hosts a daily segment on Fox 8 News in Cleveland called Missing with Amanda Berry, a platform she uses to publicize active missing persons cases, to put faces and names back into a conversation that a city can too easily stop having. She has said, simply, "I felt like this is what I'm supposed to do." Gina DeJesus took it a step further. She and her cousin founded the Cleveland Center for Missing, Abducted, and Exploited Children and Adults, a non-profit organization. And in a decision that is either extraordinary defiance or extraordinary grace, perhaps both, she opened it on Seymour Avenue, deliberately. Just down the street from where the house used to stand, the street that held them captive became the street where they built something for others. Michelle Knight, who now goes by Lily Rose Lee, has spoken about her experience in a book and in interviews. She described what captivity did to her, and she described what survival required, and she has spoken about caring for injured animals through a non-profit she runs from her home. God put me on this earth to connect humans and animals in a special way, she said. 3 women, 11 years of combined captivity, and on the other side of it, 3 separate lives built with intent and determination, each one an implicit answer to everything that was done to them. In 2022, the Attorney General of the United States presented Berry and DeJesus with the Attorney General's Award for their contributions to public safety. By that point, they had collectively helped bring attention to more cases than either of them could count. Amanda's daughter Jocelyn celebrated her 16th birthday in December 2022, the same age Amanda was when she was taken. Amanda looked at her daughter in her sweet 16 dress, a pink Cinderella gown with a tiara, and understood something about time that most people don't have to reckon with so directly. The little girl who had been born in captivity, who had learnt to cross imaginary streets, who had called chains bracelets because she didn't know any other word for them, she was now the age her mother was when everything changed. It's startling, Amanda said, with the kind of understatement that only comes from people who have genuinely lived through something unspeakable. There are some threads in this story that don't resolve cleanly, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. The question of what happened to all the missed opportunities, the knocked on doors, the unreturned calls, the neighbor reports that may or may not exist in any official record doesn't have a satisfying answer. The systemic failures that allowed a school bus driver to hold 3 women captive in a residential neighborhood for a decade have been acknowledged in part and disputed in part. The full accounting has never come. There is also the matter of what Luana Miller deserves to be remembered for. She is easy to sentimentalize the grieving mother who died before the miracle. But the woman who actually walked those streets, who called reporters and yelled at them and then called them honey, who smoked her Marlboros and hosted vigils and refused, absolutely refused, to let the world file her daughter away as a statistic. She was not a figure of gentle grief. She was furious and fierce and exhausted, and she kept going anyway. That version of her deserves to be named clearly. She was right. The world was wrong. Her daughter was alive the entire time. And her daughter came home. What this case leaves behind is not a simple lesson. True crime has a tendency to sand everything down to a moral, to a takeaway, to a thing you can say at the end. This case resists that. What it offers instead is a reminder about the cost of assumptions. The assumption that teenagers run away, the assumption that familiar people are safe, the assumption that a house in your neighborhood that looks quiet is quiet. And it offers something else too, the knowledge that survival is not passive. Amanda Berry did not just endure. She watched, she waited, she learnt the weight of every lock in that house. And when one door finally swung open on an ordinary Monday afternoon, she ran, she screamed through a crack in the door on a street where she had lived for a decade in silence. And somebody finally heard her. If you made it to the end of this one, thank you for watching. This case matters not just as a crime story, but as a story about what communities owe to the people they lose, and what people are capable of surviving when the world stops looking. Drop a comment below and tell me what part of this case stayed with you the most. If you want more real, fully researched cases every week, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss one. And if you have a case you want me to cover someone whose story deserves to be heard, leave it in the comments. I read every single one. Amanda Berry is free. Her daughter is 16. And somewhere in Cleveland, her mother's grave has been visited by a woman who kept her promise.